I always say this to people, the things of the Lord you can never explain. His ways are much higher than our ways.
Amen.
The things of the Lord you can never explain. His ways are much higher than ours. Perhaps these words best capture the life of a man whose journey seemed extraordinary from the very beginning. He was born a prince. He became a king at just 3 years old. And on Thursday night, August 27, 2026, the story of his earthly reign came to an end.
You can't explain what God can do for a city, a country, a community, an individual. You can't explain it because it's just unexplainable.
His Royal Majesty Omukama OYO Nyimba Kabamba Iguru Rukidi the Fourth, the King of Tooro, has died at the age of 34. His death was announced by the Prime Minister of Tooro Kingdom, Calvin Armstrong Romwire Akiki, who described it as an immeasurable loss to the royal family, the kingdom and the nation. The king reportedly died at about 10 p.m. while receiving medical treatment in the United States. But beyond the crown, beyond the palace, and beyond the history of books, who was King OYO?
Proud to be a born-again Christian. I'm proud of that. And that's something I know no one can take away from me ever, and I talk about my God, so proudly, in public, whether if it's to a believer or non-believer, it doesn't matter, because I know there are so many people out there who don't have the kind of relationship that we have with God.
For many, he was the little boy who captured the imagination of the world when he inherited one of Uganda's ancient kingdoms at an age when most children were only beginning to understand the world around them. For others, he was a young African monarch who grew into a quiet, dignified, and influential leader. But to those who knew and followed his spiritual journey, King OYO was also a man who openly spoke about his faith and his understanding of the goodness of God. His testimony was not necessarily found only in the royal robes or the throne. It was in the way he spoke about God's wonders, his goodness, and the mystery of his ways.
I have seen God's hand move over my life and other people's lives before. So I am a witness to God's wonders and his miracles. So when we had that crusade and what I saw, it was incredible. I mean, the people who couldn't walk were walking. People who couldn't see, had their sight back.
And perhaps that is where the story of King OYO becomes more than the story of a king. It becomes the story of a man who, despite being born into reality, understood that there are things greater than earthly power. King OYO was born on 16th April 1992 to King Patrick David Matthew Ramhocha Kawoyo Olimi III and Queen Mother Best Kemigisha. His childhood changed dramatically in August 1995 when his father died. At only 3 years of age, the young Prince OYO became heir to the Tooro throne. On 12th September 1995, he ascended to the throne of Tooro, becoming the world's youngest reigning monarch at the time. The Tooro kingdom itself records that his ascension placed him in the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's youngest reigning monarch. A 3-year-old king was an image that fascinated the world. But behind the photographs, ceremonies, and royal regalia was a child who still had to grow up. Because of his young age, the affairs of the kingdom were overseen by regents as he grew into his responsibilities. He went to school, developed his interests, and eventually pursued higher education in the United Kingdom, graduating from the University of Winchester with a degree in business management in 2013. On reaching adulthood, King OYO gradually assumed greater responsibility for the cultural leadership of Tooro. His official coronation took place in April 2010 when he was 18, marking an important transition from the celebrated child monarch to an adult king taking on his responsibilities. For more than 3 decades, his name became inseparable from Tooro. The kingdom, whose people are known as the Tooro, is one of Uganda's traditional kingdoms. Its monarch does not exercise constitutional political power, but the institution carries considerable culture and social significance, particularly as a custodian of the history, identity, and traditions of the people. King Oyo used his position to engage with issues affecting young people. In 2016, he was appointed by UNAIDS as a champion for HIV and AIDS among young people in Eastern and Southern Africa, reflecting his wider role beyond the royal household. His Christian faith was, for many who followed him, one of the striking aspects of his personality. He spoke of God's goodness and of the things that human beings cannot always understand. And in this, some saw a parallel with another king whose story is recorded in the Bible, David. David was a king, but his story was not defined only by his throne. He was also a worshipper, a man who acknowledged God in both victory and uncertainty. King Oyo's story, in its own unique way, reminds us of that same tension: the earthly crown on one side and a recognition of a higher authority on the other. A king can command respect, a king can inherit a throne, a king can become a symbol of an entire people. But ultimately, as King Oyo himself appeared to knowledge in his reflections on God's goodness, there are matters that remain beyond human explanation. For a king whose life began with a crown and ended in the hands of God, perhaps his greatest legacy will not only be that he was the world's greatest, youngest king. Perhaps it will also be that beyond the throne, he remembered the one whom he believed was greater than the throne. May His Majesty Omukama, OYO, Nyimba, Kabamba, Iguru, Rukidi the fourth rest in eternal peace.
And we believe that God's hand is going to do amazing things for the people of Tooro spiritually.